The Bible records 12 apostles. It records Paulo. It records Maria Magdalena. But there is a character who found Jesus before all of them, prophesied about him with disturbing detail, and then simply vanishes from the pages of history. No epistle, no church founded, no book with his name, as if someone had decided to erase him. His name was Simeon. And the story surrounding this man is one of the strangest, densest, and most ignored in all of biblical literature. You need to understand the setting first. Jerusalem in the 1st century before the Christian era was no ordinary city. It was the nerve center of a people who carried on their backs more than 1,000 years of promises, defeats, exiles, and returns. It was a city under foreign occupation, administered by a puppet king who built grand temples with one hand and signed execution orders with the other. Herodes the Great had begun the expansion of the Segundo Templo around the year 20 before Christ. A colossal work, with stones weighing up to 500 tons and courtyards so vast they held tens of thousands of pilgrims simultaneously. The complex was, by the standards of the time, one of the architectural wonders of the known world. The temple renovated by Herodes had dimensions that still impress modern archaeologists. The Monte do Templo had been artificially expanded with platforms supported by arches and retaining walls. The stones used in the construction measured up to 12 meters long, 3 meters high, and 4 meters wide, monolithic blocks whose weight exceeded 600 tons. Cut in quarries on the outskirts of Jerusalem, transported with ramp and lever systems, fitted with a precision that required no mortar, these blocks created a platform upon which the temple itself rose in white marble and gold, visible from miles away. Diaspora Jews making pilgrimages from Alexandria, Babylonia, or Roma would reach the top of the climb and stand still, unable to look away. But beneath all this magnificence, there was a tension that no stone could hide. The people of Israel had lived under the Roman yoke for decades. Taxes were extortionate. The presence of foreign soldiers in the sacred streets of Jerusalem was a constant humiliation. And the religious leaders, the priests, the Pharisees, the scribes, had split into factions vying for influence while the common people tried to survive. In this political and spiritual cauldron, there was a group that did not participate in the power struggles. They were not wealthy priests. They were not synagogue leaders. They were called in Hebrew the Anawim, the poor of Deus. People who had let go of ambition and the struggle for recognition and had surrendered completely to waiting. A wait that lasted generations. A wait for something the sacred texts called the Consolación de Israel. Simeon was one of these men. The text of Lucas, chapter 2, verse 25, uses 2 words to describe him, justo and temente. In the language of the period, this was no vague compliment. It was a precise diagnosis. A justo man was someone who kept his obligations to others. A temente man was someone who kept his obligations to Deus. Together, these 2 attributes described someone who had found a rare balance. He was not an ascetic fleeing the world, nor a religious man using faith as a social tool. He was someone who had decided to live well, in every possible sense, while waiting for something he could not precisely describe. Because this is the most disconcerting part of Simeon's story. He was waiting for the Consolación de Israel, and you need to understand the specific weight of that expression to comprehend what this man carried inside him every day. The Consolación de Israel was not a vague concept of generic religious hope. It was a technical term, loaded with specific prophetic references. It came directly from the book of Isaiah, especially from chapters 40 onward, where the prophet describes the end of exile, the return of the people, and the arrival of a divine agent who would restore not just the nation of Israel, but redefine the relationship between Deus and all of humanity. The consolación that Isaiah promised was too specific to be interpreted as a metaphor. It was concrete, it was historical, it was political, and it was, at the same time, completely different from anything that had happened before. Men like Simeon read Isaiah and knew that the promise was still pending. The Babylonian exile had ended, the people had returned, the temple had been rebuilt. But the full consolation, the one described in stunning detail in the Servo Sofredor passages and the Restoration oracles, had not yet arrived, and Simeon waited. With a patience that defied any human calculation. What does it mean to wait your whole life for something you cannot date, cannot locate, cannot photograph, only feel with a certainty that no external evidence confirmed? This is the question that Simeon's narrative places before any honest reader, because the biblical text claims something even more disturbing than the waiting itself. Lucas says that the Espírito Santo was upon him, and that this same Espírito had revealed that he would not die before seeing the Cristo of the Señor. Not just any Cristo, the Cristo of the Señor, the definitive anointed one, the agent who would transform everything. This means Simeon woke up every day carrying a promise that no one around him could verify. There was no proof, no date, no address. There was only the inner certainty and the conviction that, at some point before his death, he would see what had been promised. Consider the psychological weight of this. Every passing day was another day of waiting. Every year he aged was a year that narrowed the available window of time, and yet Simeon remained. Researchers who studied this period have tried over the centuries to identify who Simeon might have been outside the sacred texts. Some Jewish traditions mention a sage named Simeon, son of Hillel, the Hillel of the famous pair Hillel and Shammai, the two great rabbinical schools of the period. If this identification were correct, Simeon would be the father of Gamaliel, the same Gamaliel who decades later would become the teacher of the young Saulo de Tarso, whom the world would know as Paulo. The circle would be dizzying, but there is no historical confirmation of this link. It is speculation, however intriguing it may be. What exists in the historical texts of the period is a rich portrait of the environment in which Simeon lived. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered only in 1947 in a cave near Qumran, revealed that messianic expectation in Israel was much more intense and varied than any historian had imagined. The Qumran community expected not one, but two messiahs, one sacerdotal and one royal. The Pharisees expected a political liberator who would expel the Romans. The Zealots expected a military leader who would start an armed revolution. And the Anawim, the poor of Deus, expected something different from them all. They expected the consolation, the inner restoration, the divine presence that would transcend any human government. Simeon was in this last category. The daily life of an Anawim in Jerusalem in the 1st century before the Christian era was fundamentally different from the daily life of a priest or a religious leader. There was no power to exercise, no disciples to supervise, no lectures to give in the temple courtyards. There were only the daily prayers, the morning shacharit, the afternoon mincha, the evening avit, and the reading of prophetic texts that fueled hope. Men like Simeon knew Isaiah by heart. They knew Micaias. They knew Jeremiah. And they read these texts not as religious archaeology, but as active correspondence. A letter still open, waiting for a reply. It was a way of life that the surrounding society hardly respected. In a world where status was measured by position in the priestly system, by property, by the number of disciples, or by the ability to debate the law, an old man who simply waited and prayed was invisible. It wasn't that people despised him, it was that they didn't notice him, and Simeon, by all accounts, preferred it that way. While the world built with stones that lasted 2 millennia, While Roman governors collected taxes and soldiers patrolled the streets, an old man in Jerusalem woke up every day, went to the temple, and waited. He didn't know the name of the one he sought. He didn't know the appearance. He didn't know the tribe, the trade, or the city of origin. He only knew that he would recognize the moment when it arrived. You now need to understand the ritual that brought Maria and Jose to the temple on that specific day, because the meeting with Simeon was not accidental. It was the result of a series of religious obligations that the system of the law of Moses prescribed with surgical precision. According to Levitico chapter 12, a woman who gave birth to a male child was in a state of ritual impurity for 40 days. After this period, she was required to appear at the temple for a purification rite. She brought an offering, a year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon for a sin offering. But there was a provision for the poor. If the family could not afford the lamb, 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons would suffice. Lucas chapter 2 verse 24 records that Maria and Jose brought 2 young pigeons. In 4 words, the evangelist signaled the economic condition of Jesus' family. They were poor. There was also a second obligation. According to Números chapter 3, every firstborn male belonged to the Señor, a symbolic heritage from the night of Passover in Egitto, when the firstborn of Israel was spared while the Egyptians died. To redeem this son, the family paid 5 silver shekels to the priesthood. It was a formal recorded transaction, part of a system that dated back to Moises. Maria and Jose went to the Temple of Jerusalem to fulfill these 2 obligations: the purification of the mother and the presentation of the firstborn son. The women's court was the 3rd space from the outside in the temple complex. After the court of the Gentiles, where anyone could enter, and after the court of Israel, reserved exclusively for Jewish men, lay the treasury chamber, where women deposited their offerings. It was a busy space, especially in the weeks after winter, when families who had given birth at the beginning of the year came to regularize their ritual situation. There were lines. There were priests receiving offerings, checking animals, conducting rites. There were children, elderly women in different stages of religious life, all fulfilling obligations that the system prescribed with equal demand for rich and poor alike. Try to visualize what this means in practical terms. They had traveled from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, a journey of approximately 10 kilometers on foot, with a 40-day-old baby in their arms. It was no tourist excursion. It was the fulfillment of the law. Herodes' temple, at that moment, was under permanent construction. Workers everywhere, stones being cut, marble being polished. The women's court, where the purification rite took place, was separated from the court of Israel by a sequence of gates. The family entered as hundreds of other families entered every day to follow protocol. And it was in this courtyard, on this specific day, among hundreds of pilgrims, that Simeon appeared. Lucas says he was led by the Espírito to the temple that day. There is no other explanation in the text. There was no messenger, no warning, no scheduled appointment. There was, according to the account, an inner guidance. The same force that had made the promise was now leading him to its fulfillment. Simeon entered the temple as he did every day, as he had for decades, and saw that couple with a newborn in their arms. How did a man who had never seen Jesus before know, the instant he saw him, that this was the right child among all the babies presented at the temple that day? There was no external sign, no cloud of glory, no visible angels. There was a young mother of about 16, an older man carrying the offering pigeons, and a 40-day-old baby, wrapped in the cloths of the time. There was likely nothing to visually distinguish them from the other families around. And yet Simeon approached, stretched out his arms, and took the child. The gesture itself was bold. In the social conventions of the period, Holding someone else's child without explicit permission was unusual. But something in Simeon's behavior communicated clear intent. Maria and Jose allowed it, and the old man held in his arms what he had waited decades for, lifted his face, and opened his mouth. What came out was a song so precise, so dense, so strange in the mouth of a stranger that theologians study it to this day. Christian tradition calls it by its Latin incipit, nunc dimittis, now you dismiss. The first words, now, Señor, let your servant depart in peace according to your word. Examine this opening carefully. Simeon is not praying for healing. He is not asking for more time. He is asking for permission to die. He is telling Deus in public in the temple courtyard that his mission on earth is over, that the reason he had remained alive, that specific promise, that endless wait, had been fulfilled, and that now he was ready to go. What follows is even more disconcerting. For my eyes have seen your salvação, which you have prepared before all peoples, a light to enlighten the Gentios and the glory of your people Israel. Analyze the layers of this text with the attention it deserves. Simeon did not say he saw the liberator of Israel. He did not say he saw the king of the Jews. He did not say he saw the son of David who would expel the Romans, which was what most people expected. He said he saw the salvação prepared before all peoples, universal, all-encompassing, inclusive to a degree that had no precedent in the dominant Jewish theology of the period. And he went further. He called that child a light to the Gentios, to non-Jews, to Romans, to Greeks, to all those whom popular theology considered excluded from the covenant of Israel. The expression, light to the Gentios, comes directly from Isaiah, chapter 42, verse 6, one of the so-called servant songs, passages describing a mysterious agent whom Deus sends to restore not only Israel, but to bring justice to the nations. Simeon quoted Isaiah from memory, applying the text to the child in his arms, establishing a direct line between the prophecy written centuries before and the 40-day-old baby he held. It was exegesis and testimony simultaneous. It was the kind of connection that only someone with decades of immersion in prophetic texts could make so naturally. This was subversive. In terms of first-century messianic expectations, calling the Messiah a light to the Gentios was politically incorrect and theologically daring. The Zealots would have been outraged. Many of the Pharisees would have disagreed. But Simeon said, in the temple courtyard, with a 40-day-old baby in his arms, exactly what Isaiah had written centuries earlier, that the mission of the definitive servant of Deus would transcend ethnic and national borders. Lucas records that Maria and Jose were amazed at what was said about the child. They were young, simple parents who had received extraordinary announcements but were still processing the weight of what they were living. And a stranger in a temple courtyard confirmed with precise words something they themselves did not yet know how to fully formulate. But Simeon was not finished. He looked at Maria, specifically at Maria, and the tone shifted. Until now it had been a song of gratitude. Now it was a dark prophecy. This child is destined to be the fall and the resurrection of many in Israel. Pause. And to be a sign that will be contested. Another pause. And a sword will pierce your own soul. Observe the scene for a moment. A mother, 40 days postpartum, still in the process of physical recovery, who had made a journey on foot to fulfill a religious obligation, is approached by a stranger who first sings a blessing and then announces that her son will cause radical division in Israel and that she herself will suffer a pain comparable to being pierced by a sword. It was not the message any young mother expected to hear at a purification rite. Simeon's prophecy is, technically, one of the densest and most comprehensive ever spoken about Jesus in the Gospels. It anticipates rejection. It anticipates conflict. It anticipates the division Jesus would cause within Israel itself, the fall and resurrection of many, not all, but many, depending on each person's response. It anticipates public contestation, and, in a raw and direct way, it anticipates Maria's suffering, the pain of seeing her own son die violently. The word simeao used for sword was in Greek rhomphaia, not the common word for a short sword, but the word for a long, heavy blade, the kind that did not wound superficially. It was the sword that pierced through completely. In terms of poetic imagery, it was impossible to be more explicit about the degree of suffering Maria would experience. Some interpreters over the centuries have tried to soften the prophecy, reading the sword as a metaphor for doubt or inner conflict. But the parallel structure of the text suggests that Simeon was talking about something as concrete as the division Jesus would cause in Israel, and that Maria's suffering would be equivalently concrete. Decades later, on the day a man from Nazareth was crucified outside the walls of Jerusalem, Jerome records that Maria stood near the cross. She was there. She had not fled. She had not turned away. She was in the front row of one of the most violent events Jerusalem had witnessed in that generation. And at that moment, the prophecy pronounced 40 days after her son's birth was fulfilled with a literality that no metaphor could soften. Simeon said all this without hesitating, without softening, without qualifying, with the precision of someone who had waited so long that he no longer had patience for half measures, and then, according to the biblical text, he simply vanishes. There is no further mention of Simeon in the rest of the Novo Testamento. There is no record that he followed Jesus in his adult life, no letter, no community founded in his name. No patristic tradition mentions him as a group leader or movement founder. The most natural hypothesis, suggested by the very nature of his song, which was a request for permission to die, is that he died shortly after that encounter. He fulfilled his promise, recognized what he had waited for, declared what needed to be declared, and departed. But before the scene in the temple courtyard ends, a second character emerges from the shadows, Anna. The text of Lucas, chapter 2, verses 36 to 38, introduces her with more biographical detail than it gave for Simeon, daughter of Phanuel of the tribe of Aser, a prophetess. She had lived with her husband for 7 years after her marriage, became a widow, and since then had not left the temple, worshipping Deus with fasting and prayer day and night. Lucas says she was 84 years old. Consider this fact for a moment. A woman 84 years old who literally lived in the temple. Not metaphorically, literally. She slept there, ate there, prayed there. She had turned the temple complex into her permanent residence. This was not impossible in the system of the period. There were chambers and spaces within the complex that accommodated people devoted to continuous service. But it was extraordinarily uncommon, and it was the result of decades of radical choices by a woman who had lost her husband early and decided there was nothing else in the world worth her attention besides waiting. At the same moment Simeon was finishing his prophecy, Anna approached. Lucas does not record what she said to the child or the parents, only that she gave thanks to Deus and spoke about the child to all who were looking for the Redenção de Jerusalem. She also knew, she also recognized, and she went to the people, to the specific group of those who were waiting, and spoke. Lucas's silence regarding Anna's exact words is not accidental to scholars of the text. At other times in the Evangelio, when Lucas wants to preserve specific words, he preserves them. The fact that he recorded Simeon's song with precision but condensed Anna's speech into a description of behavior suggests two possibilities. Either Lucas did not have access to Anna's exact words, which is historically plausible, given she was an elderly woman whose words were likely not recorded by scribes of the period, Or what she said was so extensive that synthesizing it was the only option within an account that had already been carefully condensed. In either case, what remains is the image. An 84-year-old prophetess who left the encounter with Jesus and immediately began talking about him to everyone she met. What is notable about Anna's presence is what she represents in terms of narrative and historical structure. Jewish tradition required two witnesses to establish a legal fact. A man and a woman in that courtyard on the same day, without prior arrangement, two independent witnesses of the same recognition. Simeon said who the child was. Anna confirmed and spread the word, and then both vanished from history in the same way they had appeared, completely. Think of the paradox this represents for any historian. The apostles spent 3 years with Jesus. They witnessed miracles, heard teachings, saw the resurrection. And the result was a corpus of texts, evangelios, epistles, the apocalypse, covering decades of tradition, transmitted by hundreds of communities, preserved in thousands of manuscripts. Simeon spent perhaps 20 minutes with Jesus. He said a few sentences, and he vanished. But what he said in those 20 lines of Lucas is, in terms of theological density, comparable to entire passages by Paulo or João. What explains this narrative economy? Why did Lucas, who clearly valued what Simeon said, so much so that he preserved the song word for word, not find anything else to tell about this man? One possibility is that for Simeon, there was simply nothing more to tell. His function was unique, specific, unrepeatable. He was not a movement founder. He was a witness of recognition, the rarest category in history, the first who knew before there was any evidence to know. Another possibility, less comfortable for traditional historiography, is that there was more material and it was lost. The first centuries of Christianity were tumultuous in terms of text preservation. Communities were dispersed, libraries were burned, manuscripts were selectively copied. What has reached us is a fraction of what existed, and in a fraction, a man from Jerusalem who lived in anonymity, died without leaving a school, and appeared in the historical record only once, in 20 lines of the 2nd chapter of Lucas, would have little chance of occupying space proportional to his importance. What remains are the words. And Simeon's words, when you read them slowly, reveal something disturbing about the nature of recognition and waiting. He did not go through the city proclaiming he had seen the Messiah. He did not start a communication campaign. He did not organize followers. He said what he knew to those who needed to hear it and finished, with a restraint that contrasts violently with the urgency you would expect from someone who had waited decades for that moment. Centuries of archaeology, decades of research into the Dead Sea Scrolls, expeditions to sites excavated beneath modern Jerusalem. All of this to try to understand who Jesus de Nazareth was and what he represented to the ancient world. This man needed none of that. He didn't need evidence, documented miracles, or a confirmed resurrection. He saw a 40-day-old baby in his mother's arms, and he knew. Perhaps the difference lies exactly in what his own words reveal. He was waiting, and those who wait with enough patience learn to recognize what they seek when it finally appears.